Over the last few weeks, we set the background for what it will be like in the world prior to the coming of the awaited Imam al-Mahdi when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasten his reappearance. And last week we spoke about the uprising of the Imam and what will take place during the revolution of the Imam when he reappears and what is likely to happen in the imminent days of his reappearance. But this week I want to focus on a certain topic which is related to the uprising of the awaited Imam and in relation to how he forms his government. And this is the topic and the issue of what role will women play during the uprising of the Imam and when he forms his holy government. And this topic, as I briefly mentioned last week, is something which is very important and is very necessary for us to discuss. Because unfortunately, in many, if not most, of our communities, in our circles, in our mosques, women are neglected. Women are not given the attention and the treatment that they are supposed to get in Islam. And they are also not given the same religious opportunities as men. And inshallah we'll discuss if this will be the case during the time of the awaited Imam and what role women will play in his government. What we know is that in a true Islamic society, in a true Islamic community, women are given the ability and they are entrusted to participate and to play a role, an important role in society. They are allowed to take part, for example, in the Islamic government and in education, for example, and in various other important roles. This can be seen, for example, under an Islamic government in Iran. For example, 61% of women are the majority in students for humanities and for experimental sciences in that country. If you compare that to here, this is an even greater figure than we see in Western and in secular societies. And what we also see in that country is that women are increasingly being found in the parliament, they are increasingly being made ministers in the Islamic government. And they are also creating their own female political movements to try and further the cause of women playing a role in the Islamic government and in the Islamic society. In the Islamic Republic, for example, nearly 83% of the female civil servants work in teaching, they work in education, they work in administrative, financial, healthcare, and in medical professions. And this is something which we should admire, and this is something that we should look at as an example of how it should be in our communities. And this shows also that when there is an Islamic government which is in power, where there is an Islamic government which dictates the way in which the country is run, women need to and must play an important role in the foundations of society. If you look back, obviously now in that country there is an Islamic Republic, there is an Islamic government. Prior to that, when it was the time of the Shah, women had been restricted to staying in their house and raising their children, and they were restricted from going into universities, for example, and of course they were restricted in terms of the bans on the hijab, the bans on the religious veil. And if they wanted to go and have a job, they would require the signature of their husband to go and do so. However, contrary to what the lies we are being told by certain countries about that nation, nowadays, after the revolution, there was a big change in this. Women no longer needed to go through all of these difficult barriers in order to play a role in society. They weren't locked up in their houses, and they were eager to then, after the revolution, gain some form of independence and earn for themselves and earn their rights. And it is true that the woman's prime responsibility is to be in the home and to raise children and to nurture them with the correct Islamic knowledge so that the future generations will grow up into good Muslims, into good believers, and into good people who can benefit the society around them. However, after the revolution, women were also granted the equality of opportunity with men so that they could fulfill the same roles and to try and gain a place in the country. So if we go back a little bit first and we look at Islam as a religion itself and as a movement, we see that Islam created and incited a revolutionary change amongst the status of women within the family and within society as a whole in a way which had never been seen before the time of Islam. In the pre-Islamic period, so in the days of Jahiliyyah, the days of ignorance, the concept of a woman itself, the idea of a woman was that she was solely someone who would be used for the pleasures and the needs of men. And men would be the labourers whose job was to earn the money, and women would raise the children. And this is what all women were useful for. They had no human rights. For example, in the Arabian Peninsula, it was very often the case that women were simply passed as inheritance. Therefore, women were viewed as objects who could be sold and who could be bought, just like cattle, just like sheep. And even in some cases, it was the case where newborn children would be born and it would be discovered that they were females, and out of the shame for having a daughter, people used to bury them alive because of the disdain for women and the fact that they were viewed as lesser than men and of lesser importance. When Islam came, however, there was a rejection of this from the religion itself, because we know that Islam views women as the counterpart of men in terms of their humanity. A woman is not worth less than a man according to the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where He says in the Holy Quran that people are the same. What they are judged on and what makes someone better than the other is their piety and their good deeds, not in terms of their gender. And what Islam did was it placed the responsibility of the bridal gift, for example the mahar, and the provision of her basic necessities on the shoulders of men. Men were given the responsibility in order to preserve and to protect women and to elevate their status. Islam views the woman as man's partner in life to such an extent that not only is she something which is not inherited by men, but rather she inherits from men herself. And just like a man, Islam came forward and it said that a woman has the possibility to participate in the society, to participate in culture, to participate in religion, to participate in government as well, just the same way a man would do, on the conditions where she would be able to preserve her purity and preserve her chastity. And this is not just a one-sided argument which I'm coming forward with today. The best examples you can see of this from the Islamic history, for example, we have Sayyidah Khadija, we have Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, we have Sayyidah Zainab. All of these individuals, these role models who we look up to and we mention in every one of our gatherings, if we pause and take a minute, these are women. These are women who did not just sit in their houses and twiddle their thumbs and do nothing. No, they played important roles in Islamic history. They played important roles in preserving the religion, more so than the majority of men in that society did. And this is something to bear in mind when we look especially at how the government of Imam al-Mahdi will be formed. Speaking of Imam al-Mahdi, the reappearance of the Imam, just like the appearance of Islam as a religion itself, will also create another revolutionary change in the world. In particular, the Imam will address the current day of ignorance, the current days of Jahiliyyah which we are facing in this present day, which has revived itself when we look at what happened in the old days of ignorance, where women were treated as commodities and were not given the respect that they deserve. The women of today have regressed. The status of women today has regressed to the times of before Islam, where women were treated lesser than men. And all of these titles which we hear about today, especially in the Western secular world, such as the absolute equality of men and women, these concepts such as freedom, human rights, which we know are a farce in the way that they're embodied practically. By coming forward with these statements, what we can see is that all of these political leaders in the world have turned women into nothing but commodities. They have turned them into nothing but objects to be used by men, and it strips them of all of their value and all of their humanity. A woman's chastity and her purity, for example, no matter what position she holds in society, is always going to be vulnerable to exploitation by men. And because of this regression, because of this backwardsness state which we have reached, which is comparable to the days of Jahiliyyah, we can see that the very backbone of our societies are beginning to crumble and are beginning to weaken. And it is for these reasons that the world, as we know, is now in dire need of someone to come and reverse this change, someone to come and bring about a different sort of ideals and values that we hold towards women so that they can be given their rightful place and so that humanity can reach its stage of perfection, which we have been guaranteed when the Imam reappears. And we Shias, from the time of the Holy Prophet, have understood that the promised appearance of Imam al-Mahdi is something which is guaranteed, is something which is promised. And we have been in this constant state of waiting, this constant state of anticipation, waiting for the time when this backward state that we are in today can be changed. I was talking about the age of ignorance, the age of Jahiliyyah. And in that time I mentioned how women were not even considered as normal human beings. They were given no rights, and in some cases their very existence was considered a source of embarrassment, such as when they used to bury their own daughters alive out of shame. Rasulullah, however, injected new life into that society when he came about and when Islam was brought into the fold of this world. When the Holy Prophet came and introduced Islam, he granted women rights and responsibilities that corresponded to the rights and the responsibilities of men. These same women who, before the rise of Islam as a religion came into play, as we mentioned, they were nothing but property at the hands of men. They could be given away whether or not a man felt like giving the woman away. And when Islam came, women were granted the right to hold property, and they were also granted the right to inherit property for men. So we can see that there was a drastic change in the treatment of women from before the time of Islam and during the time of Islam. Islam raised the status and the station of women to such an extent, to such a high degree, that the Holy Prophet even accepted the pledges of allegiance for women when they wanted to come into battle with him. They were allowed to accompany the Muslim armies onto the battlefield to fight against the disbelievers. And they didn't just come as combatants, they didn't just play the role of fighters, they came as educators, teachers, nurses, medical professionals, and also for moral support for the Muslim armies. What we saw is that from these examples, women could be teachers, they could be defenders of the law, especially of the Islamic law. And by taking part in these activities and by fulfilling these roles which were available during the time of Islam, it was said that women could even rise above the station and the status of angels due to the activities which they took part in. So if we look at it from one perspective, we can see that the importance of the role women played perhaps even exceeded the role that men played. The easiest way to look at this is that a man in itself cannot give birth to a child to raise a future generation. It is women who have been granted this task by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is women who have been given the responsibility to bring other human beings into this world, to nurture them and to raise them into believers who will serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in the words of Imam Kumayl, it is because of the upbringing of the mother that a man will ascend to his perfection. Therefore, without the role of a woman, without the role of a female figure in a man's life, it isn't possible for him to reach these high levels which Islam asks and demands people reach. Therefore, the importance of women cannot be overstated. Now, when we look at the ahadith, when we look at the narrations we have on the role of women before and after the coming of Imam al-Mahdi, there's a few important and interesting points which you can find. Now, although some of the narrations we have mentioned that the followers and the supporters of the Dajjal, for example, will consist of quite a large portion of women, there's also going to be, from the narrations we have, faithful, chaste, devout Muslim women who had experienced a lot of hardships in their life in preserving their faith, in preserving their religion, and they would have been severely affected by the way men treated them prior to the Imam coming. And it is said that these women would possess the most firm stances, they would have the most jihad-minded spirits, and they would expose the evil nature of the Dajjal and his army and his followers through their propaganda war and through their teaching against his beliefs. And some of the hadiths we have, they differ in the numbers of the women, but some of them say that during the uprising and the revolution of Imam al-Mahdi, there will be 400 women that will accompany the Imam, and most of them will be engaged in activities concerning health and medical treatment of people. But we have other hadiths, for example, which say that up to 7,800 women will accompany the Imam. They will be the people who will be assisting the Imam in his duties at the forefront of his government, and they are the women who will accompany him in all of his activities. Now, when it comes to the role that women will play during the time of Imam al-Mahdi, and when he establishes his government, our knowledge of what is going to happen during that time period is very limited. Of course, we can't see into the future and say for sure the exact role what women are going to play. However, we have narrations which hint and give some form of idea as to what they will play. And in some ways, as I mentioned before, the Islamic Revolution in Iran and its aftershocks had a very big impact on the world, not just on the Muslim world, but on the secular world as well, because it showed not only during the time of the revolution, women were at the forefront of demanding a change, but after it as well. The number of women in universities actually increased during the time of an Islamic government. This is something we can look at and see that Islam promotes the rights of women, but it also shows as a slight indicator of what life will be like during the time of the Imam. Now, this hadith I'm going to mention to you talks about the role of women after Imam al-Mahdi's revolution. So it's narrated from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam that the Mahdi will rise up along with 313 men and 50 women without any previous arrangement amongst themselves. It will not be something coordinated. These will be very special and important figures. 313 men and 50 women. It is said that like separate clouds clustering the skies, one after the other, they will begin to join the Imam during his revolution. And Imam al-Baqir says that when these people rise up, this will be the meaning of the verse of the Holy Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, wherever you may be, Allah will gather you together, for Allah is capable of all things. So we have indications that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned this event in the Holy Quran. The Imam continues. He says that these 313 men and these 50 women will pledge their allegiance to Imam al-Mahdi between the black stone of the Kaaba and the station of Ibrahim, and the Mahdi will rise up with them from Mecca. And with respect, and when we talk about the way in which people will go into different jobs during the time of the Imam, we don't have any indications of what this will be. As we can see, there's not something which will exactly determine the future roles of people, and Allah knows best in this matter. However, what we can do is we can refer to the representatives of Imam al-Mahdi that are with us today. And yes, we do have representatives, we do have deputies of the Imam who are alive on this planet today. And as we mentioned numerous times, these people are the Maraja and the Ulama. For example, we have Imam Kumayl, who once said that Islam wants men and women to attain perfection. This is the goal of Islam. He says Islam saved women from the days of Jahiliyyah, and Islam has not served men as much as it has served women, and you do not realize what women were like before and what she has become now. He also said not only does Shia Islam not only take away women from the sidelines in societal matters, but it puts them in their rightful position as human beings. He says we approve of the technological advancements of the West. He says we're okay with all of the new technology which has taken place in the Western countries. However, what we reject is the corruption, the moral corruption of the West. And in another statement he goes on to say that women hold a pivotal and vital role in the societal structure, in the society, and in the way that the society is formed. He said Islam has lifted women to the extent that they can break free from being a commodity and assume their position as human beings, and as such they can assume their responsibilities within the Islamic government. Therefore, we have one of the representatives of the Imam stating very clearly that women can play a role in society, and not just this, but they can take part in the government as well. And this is how we know that during the time of the Imam, it will be women who play a special role in his government as well. There have been also specific narrations which talk about the names of the women who will take part in Imam al-Mahdi's uprising and in his government. And specifically there have been 9 women who were mentioned in the narrations and who will be, as the Imams have told us, they will be Imam al-Mahdi's companions who he will entrust with his matters and who he will look to for support. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam emphasizes their names, and the reason why he emphasizes their names especially is so that we can go away into our private lives and we can research who these figures were, so that when inshallah the time comes we can be aware of this. And once we research them, we can see some points that give an indication as to one of the reasons why Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam emphasized mentioning their names. One of the women is called Siyana, and she had been the wife of Hizqiyah, or in English, Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel. And she was also one of the hairdressers of Pharaoh, of the Pharaoh. Her husband Ezekiel, the prophet, was the cousin and he was the treasurer of Pharaoh. And it is said that her husband was one of the firm believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he believed in Nabi Musa, who was the prophet of his time. And Rasulullah has said that during the night of Mi'raj, on the way between Mecca and Masjid al-Aqsa, I suddenly smelled something pleasant which I had never smelled before. So the Holy Prophet asked the angel Jibreel, he said, "What is this beautiful pleasant smell that I can smell?" Jibreel answered him, saying, "Ya Rasulullah, it is that of the wife of Ezekiel, for she believed in Nabi Musa and she used to hide her faith." Jibreel continues to tell the Holy Prophet, he says, she used to work as a hairdresser for Pharaoh. And one day she was busy doing the hair of the daughter of Pharaoh when the comb that was in her hand suddenly fell to the floor. And without thinking, she accidentally said, "Bismillah." Pharaoh's daughter looked at her and she said, "Do you worship my father? Do you worship Pharaoh?" And she answered, "No, but I worship the one who has created your father, and I worship the one who will take your father's life away." Pharaoh's daughter naturally became very angry at this statement, because this was someone rejecting the shirk of worshipping her father. So she goes to Pharaoh and she says, "There is this woman who does my hair. She is my hairdresser, and she has her faith in Nabi Musa." So Pharaoh summons the wife of Ezekiel and he says, "Do you not recognize my divinity?" He asks her, "Do you not worship me?" And she said, "I will never turn away from the real Lord, and I will never worship you." So Pharaoh ordered a fire in a furnace to be lit. And what he said was that all of her children and her herself should be thrown into this fire in his presence. I.e., he wanted to burn them alive. At the very moment when they wanted to throw the newborn baby of Siyana into this fire, a miracle happened. Siyana began to have doubts about Islam. She began to doubt whether or not she should die in this moment out of questioning the divinity of Pharaoh. And just as she began to have those doubts, her newborn baby began to speak. And it said to her, its mother, "O mother, be patient, for you are on the right path." So the soldiers of Pharaoh, after hearing this, obviously very shocked, very scared, threw not only Siyana but her children and her newborn baby into that fire and burned them alive. The angel Jibreel continues when he talks to the Prophet, and he says, "Their ashes were poured into this very ground until the day of resurrection, and until then this ground will have that pleasant smell." Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, in the ahadith that we have, says that she will be one of the women who will be revived and returned into this world and will fall under the command and the service of Imam al-Mahdi. Another one of the women is Zubaydah, who was the wife of Harun al-Rashid. And she had been one of the Shia. She had been one of the followers of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And when Harun al-Rashid became aware of her loyalty to the family of Muhammad, he swore to divorce her. This is another one of the women who will join the ranks of Imam al-Mahdi. Another one, before I move on, is Sumayya, the mother of Ammar ibn Yasir, and who was the first female martyr in Islam. She is another one of the people who the narrations say will be revived to join the army of Imam al-Mahdi. So what we can see from this is that the women in the government of Imam al-Mahdi will fulfill the same roles and will have the same status as the men who take part in the uprising of the Imam. And women will have the same role in the uprising of Imam al-Mahdi as they had during the uprising of Rasulullah when Islam was established into this world. There is always a link. When you read the Holy Quran, the first verses of a chapter and the last verses of a chapter always link. The same way as women played an important role during the uprising of Rasulullah when he introduced Islam, women will also play a crucial role in the uprising of Imam al-Mahdi when he takes women away from the days of Jahiliyyah which we are currently experiencing. For example, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says during the time of al-Qa'im, the women will perform the same tasks they did during the time of the Holy Prophet. So this is not something which we come and we say biasedly. This is something we have narrations from. We have promises that women will play this important role. And if you look back, the women during the wars of the Holy Prophet not only took care of people medically, they also had other responsibilities such as delivering food and water to the Muslim fighters, such as cooking for them. They would deliver their weapons, they would repair the equipment, they would transport the martyrs, they would even take part in the battles themselves out of defensive action, and they would also encourage the fighters at the scene of combat. And therefore, to put it again, women will play an important role during the time of the Imam and during his uprising. And one of these important roles is the propaganda which they need to spread against the Dajjal, and the warning and the teaching they need to give to people against him and against his followers and against his evil nature. And this means that our women, our mothers, daughters, sisters, cousins, all must be educated, not just in terms of general matters, but specifically about Islam itself. This means that they must be given the same chances as men do. This means that they must not be neglected in our mosques, in our Husayniyas, or in our houses as well. When we see in some houses, for example, that the men are the ones who simply read the Quran and the ziyarah, and the women sit somewhere else doing something else, when we don't encourage our women to read the books of narrations which we have, when we don't encourage to take them to the Husayniyah, this is one of the wrong actions which our communities have failed in doing. And this is something which we need to change, because when the Imam comes, he will be relying on women to help him as well. And surely it will be your women that you want to be serving the Imam. Just as you pray every night that you will be one of the servants of the Imam, so too you should wish for the women in your family to be from the followers and servants of the Imam as well. And this means that we need to empower them, and we must not let them stay in states of ignorance, the way some of our own men, for example, are asleep. So to finish, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant victory to the mu'mineen and the madhumeen, to hasten the reappearance of the awaited Imam, and for all of the shuhada, especially those in Gaza and Palestine, and for the Hajj al-Sha'bi, please recite Surah Al-Fatiha after Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.